everyone, so I'm Ella McCabe, the Vice President of Student Support at the SRC, and we're here to film a quick video today to talk about fearless flat hunting. So I know finding a flat in a normal year can be quite a stressful process, and there's a lot to it. So especially with the pandemic going on, we thought we'd clear up some common questions about flat hunting. So I'm here with two members of our Advice Centre team, Helen and Graham. So if you both want to maybe quickly introduce yourselves, that would be great.
Hi, I'm Helen, and as Ella says, I work in the Advice Centre.
And I'm Graham, and I also work in the Advice Centre.
So Helen and Graham are going to talk through some of their top tips for flat hunting at the moment, and then we've put out a questionnaire allowing some people to submit some questions for Q&A section at the end. I believe some of them have slotted in quite nicely with some of the sections that Helen and Graham are already discussing, so they'll address them there where they're relevant, and then any questions that are left unaddressed we'll come back to at the end. So I'm going to hand it over to Helen and Graham now, if the two of you in your own time want to just start going through some of the tips that you have for students.
Okay, hi everyone. So tip number one is check the guidance. So we'll cover three areas: current Scottish Government guidance, the university guidance on a return to campus. And the big question that obviously a lot of you will be wondering is, should I look for a flat now or should I wait? So many students at this point in the year are obviously starting to plan accommodation for the next year. And in terms of current restrictions and decisions over whether everyone's to get campus, blended or online learning, the pandemic is obviously adding a lot of pressure to this. Students are facing some very, very difficult decisions at the moment with their planning and their decisions about moving into a property. So in terms of what the guidance actually has to offer at the moment, current Scottish Government guidance says, as things stand, everyone's permitted to travel across Scotland or permitted to travel into Scotland from England and Wales, and Northern Ireland will soon follow at the end of April. The 26th of April is the next Scottish Government review date for current restrictions. And the Scottish Government have indicated that they hope to open up blended learning a lot more as of the 17th of May, which hopefully will start to mean that more students can be allowed back onto campus. The current university guidance on return to campus, as things stand, aside to a few small exceptions, generally speaking, the university has got to carry out teaching online where it can. The university do update their guidance when announcements get made by the Scottish Government, and the next significant update is likely to follow the 26th of April announcement. So the big question, should you look for a flat now? And obviously understand that many of you just want a direct answer to this, should I or shouldn't I? So the big question, should you look, is quite a complex question, and it's inevitably wrapped up in amongst a lot of considerations that you'll have, like finance, whether you can commute to Glasgow from, say, the family home that you're currently living in, how much you're needing to move out of or into a property, your general well-being and your desire to just be independent from your family, as well as lots of considerations in the West End of Glasgow with the demand and supply issues, where a lot of you will be keen to start planning so that you can get quite high up that ladder and have a good chance of getting the flat that you want. For those needing to know when they're expected to be in campus to actually make that decision for a property in Glasgow, the 26th of April is the date that we should know. And the 17th of May is hopefully, fingers crossed, when more blended learning can take place and more people can be at campus. Overall, the signs are positive at the moment, but until more clarification arrives, it's just not possible to advise students to go ahead and start looking for a property in Glasgow. If you've already taken the decision to look for a property, please, I would maybe ask that you consider a couple of points. Firstly, in terms of the ability to look for a flat, view and move into a flat, the Scottish Government guidance focuses on allowing moves to take place but in a safe way and in a way that minimises risk. In practice, this means that if you can at all delay any move, the Scottish Government are keen that you do so. If not, and you want to carry on, then viewing properties online should be the norm at the moment. And if that's not possible, social distancing and usual face covering restrictions should be in place when you view a property, or if you're having to visit a letting agent or an office. In terms of worry about future lockdowns and the possibility that things open up, you then move into a flat, but you're worried about being locked into a lease. We've got a little bit of that in another slide, and we've got lots of links on it. But the key really is that if you move into a flat and you get a private residential tenancy, or if you move into one of the big student blocks, you should be able to end either lease within 28 days notice if further down the line restrictions do come back and things change again. We've got a series of links again to refer to in this tip, so I'll maybe pass to Helen for tip 2.
Thanks, Graham. So tip 2 is about location, and the reason for this is that we've had some questions from students already about where they can find somewhere to live and what areas of Glasgow they should be considering. So firstly, where do you look for somewhere to live? So the SRC hosts a flat share service on the SRC website, and we would encourage students to post up adverts if they're looking for flatmates, or if they have a room available in a shared flat, you can put an advert on there. And so we would always suggest that you check flat share. Externally, there are lots of sites available on the internet. You've got things like Spare Room, Gumtree, CityLets, S1 Rental, Glasgow West End, Uni Lodgers and Letting Web, just to name a few there. Links to all of those and all the other sites that we mentioned today are going to be available on our website, so you can find them all there. One thing to ask you to bear in mind, please remember when you're looking for a flat that adverts are just that, they're adverts, and they will always try and present the flat in its best light and might gloss over things that are not quite so ideal. And Graham is going to say more about adverts in the next section, so I'll leave that there for now. The second point on this section is about where you want to live, and obviously it would be great to live a 5-minute walk from the university, but flats are in high demand, and if you have a tight budget, then that might just not be possible. So the prices can be very, very high around Glasgow West End. And although the temptation may be to get a property quickly, don't feel that you're being rushed into accepting the first property that you find purely because it's close to the university and it might be snapped up if you don't take it. Maybe instead think about widening out your search to areas that are not immediately around the university. You could look at places, some places that are quite popular are Shawlands and Cessnock in the south of the city. You've got Maryhill and Anniesland in the north, and out to the west there's Scotstoun and Denniston to the east of Glasgow city centre. One other tip is to have a wee look at the map of Glasgow Underground, have a look at the train network and have a look at the cycle routes to get a feel for the accessibility and how easy it will be for you to travel from where you decide to live into campus when you need to. The SRC produces a document every year called The Guide, and this includes a useful section called Moving On, which has more information in it about choosing where to live. And you can find an electronic copy of the guide on the SRC website, and it has a whole heap of other useful information in it about student life at Glasgow, so we highly recommend that you have a look in there before you make your decisions. And I'm now going to hand back to Graham, who's going to talk about how to avoid housing scams.
Thanks, Helen. So tip number 3 is beware of scammers. So in this we'll cover the dangers of online adverts, warning signs, and really just using internet resources to try and minimise any risk of being possibly scammed. So in the Advice Centre every year unfortunately we see students who've been the victim of a scam in relation to many things, but flat hunting seems to be quite a core area, and there's large amounts of money that gets scammed every year, and there's a lot of people out there that are quite willing to scam and commit crimes, mainly in 2 platforms. Facebook and Gumtree are the 2 that really seem to be quite problematic. So the dangers of online adverts. Online adverts are unregulated and carry risks. So unregulated, that just means that there's nobody really that's overseeing adverts being posted, and there's nobody really enforcing any legality that might currently exist about what you can and can't do, so they're a bit of a law unto themselves. Is the advert really being posted by the landlord? That's a good question to ask. And is the flat really that nice? And why is the rent really so low? And is there really no deposit required? They're all red warning lights for us. A common scam that we tend to see is where an advert gets posted for a property which isn't actually owned or managed by the poster. So the idea is that the poster then is involved in an email exchange, bank details are shared, money's shared, and unfortunately the student will then down the line find out what they've paid money for, in fact, is for a property that's not even let by that person. And another scam we see is where properties are alleged to be managed by Airbnb using very fake but extremely authentic looking Airbnb graphics that make things look like it is Airbnb that are managing the property. And again, money's changed hands and there is no property. So warning signs, as a general rule, if anything appears too good to be true, this is definitely a cue to dig a bit deeper. So have a little look at the links that we've got, which really just outlines a range of all the different scams, including the Airbnb scam and the fake property scam. There's quite a few others as well to keep in mind. And really just a tip on using the internet. So we'll use Google all the time. We know how powerful it is. And it's quite typical in the device center that we use Google to search property addresses, landlord names, email addresses, online reviews. And it's quite surprising sometimes just the extent of information that you're able to get just by a simple Google search. So definitely think about that. You can also easily check the property that's advertised, see whether it's registered as it should be with the Scottish Landlord Register. You can also see if there's an agent involved, if they're registered with the letting agent register as they also should be. And a big one to think about, which I think was a question we got asked, is beware that if the flat is occupied by more than 2 unrelated tenants, it's probably wise to check if the property has an HMO registration. It should have an HMO registration, but there's a lot of landlords out there that don't get one. And down the line, if you move into a property like that and there's 3 of you, there can be quite significant problems there. Just keep all these things aware when you're looking for properties. And the caveat, as always, is get in touch with us if anything's suspicious or doesn't look right. Drop us a mail, get in touch with us, and we can always look over whatever you've got. So I'll move on to tip 4, Helen again.
Thanks, Graham. Okay. Tip 4, this was another question that came to us through the Microsoft form, and it's about finding flatmates. And we know that many of you won't have had as much opportunity to get to know other students this year, and that's causing you some worries when you're thinking about who you're going to live with next year. And given the pressure on finding somewhere to live and someone to live with, combined with the demand for properties that are near the university, there is understandably a temptation to move quickly, and this might mean that you end up living with people that you don't really know, or worse still, that you don't actually get on with at all. So if you're moving into accommodation with others, obviously spend some time thinking through what living with them might actually be like in practice. There's a balance to be struck there between having your quiet time to yourself and having the companionship and the kind of liveliness of living with the other people that you're considering. It is helpful to make the choice to live with other people based on experiences through actual interactions that you may have already had with them. So people that you already know, maybe via your studies or social circle or online groups or whatever. Moving in with somebody that you don't know is really quite an unknown quantity, and I appreciate that obviously many of you will have to do that very thing this year especially. There's a website called the Uni Guide, which has produced a checklist of things to think about before you move in with others, and as with all the links we talk about in this presentation, we'll provide links on the SRC website so that you can go and have a little read of what they suggest. So where can you find a flatmate? Our suggestions would be that you use connections you might have made this year already, either maybe through your classes or your tutorial groups. Are you involved with any clubs or societies? Have you met anybody with your same interests as you through clubs and societies, or any volunteering that you may have done? Or else think about what sort of social media groups you're in. You're on Facebook, are you in any Facebook groups, and whether there's any potential flatmates to be found there. As we've already mentioned, there is the SRC Flat Share service, and you can post an ad looking for flatmates for yourself, or you can respond to adverts from people who have rooms in shared flats. We've also had some advice from our elected students on SRC Council to the effect that if you are responding to adverts from other people, just remember to be yourself, share a few interests about yourself, and be positive, and don't play it too cool. Obviously, every year we get some contacts from students where relationships in the flat have become strained or broken down, and students might be thinking about leaving the flat and trying to get out of their accommodation contract. And so what you need to keep in mind is that you will most likely be entering into what's called a joint tenancy with the other students. And that means that if you individually want to leave, but your flatmates don't want to leave, then you're going to be tied into that tenancy, and you'll still be responsible for your share of the rent until you can find someone else to replace you. So it's not all that straightforward to leave if things become difficult. And that's a major reason why we're asking you and suggesting to you that you think carefully about who you're going to live with and how that's going to work, and maybe think ahead as to how you might handle as a flat any disputes that arise between you in the course of the time that you're there. A few things to think about if relationships in a flat have started to break down are things like, have you tried to have discussions? Have you raised your concerns? Obviously, nobody's perfect, and sharing your home usually requires quite a lot of compromise. And before anything escalates further, having an open and honest and frank, clear the air conversation to highlight concerns and listen to each other is really vital. And remember that you can always talk in confidence to the SRC advice team. So if you're worried about a flatmate's behaviour or anything like that, then we can help you work out what to do next. I'm going to hand back to Graham now, who's going to talk about repairs.
Thanks, Helen. So tip 5 in need of repair. There's 3 areas in this. What is a habitable property, viewing a property, and warning signs. So the one thing maybe to say at the start here is you might be in a situation where you've found the ideal location, but the condition of the property perhaps isn't ideal. And the one thing to say, and it might sound obvious, but don't rush in, because we see in the advice centre that there's a huge temptation if you find a property and it's in the perfect street, but it isn't ideal. There's a huge temptation to rush in, but there are a whole raft of problems potentially down the line as a result of that. So just stop, have a little think, and here are some things that perhaps you might want to consider. So the first thing really is that you deserve to live in a nice property. You deserve to live in a comfortable home that you can make your home and you can feel comfortable in. And in order to do that, landlords have obligations. When they rent properties, that they register as a landlord, and also that the property's fit for inhabitation and fit to a reasonably good standard. So we've got some guidance and links about 2 key areas. There's a thing called the repairing standard and another called the tolerable standard. And both of these are formal documents and guidance as to what landlords should be adhering to in terms of the quality of the property that they're renting out. So these things might include, that it's got to be watertight, the heating system has to work, any appliances at all in the property, washing machines, fridges that are supplied as part of the tenancy, they have to be kept in working order. These are all the landlord's responsibilities. In terms of viewing a property, you should check that the property is obviously clean and carry out a visual check of everything within the property, taking note and ideally pictures even on your phone if you possibly can. Anything that's broken, any marks, the 2 classics are carpets and walls, any holes, anything that just doesn't look right, take a picture of it because it will come in handy later. We've also got guides in our links as to how to carry out what they call an inventory. So that's essentially a list of absolutely everything that's present in the property, all the chairs, the tables, everything down to cups, cutlery, pots, kettles. And that's a comprehensive list of everything that's there and also the condition of everything. And before you were to sign any lease, that is exactly the document you should have and you should sign, so that if there's any problems and something is broken, it can be easily referred to as to whether it was broken before you moved in as opposed to broken when you've moved in yourself. A few warning signs really. You're completely right to point out things when you view a property to the landlord or agent that doesn't seem to be right or doesn't look to be in good working order. So if you visit a property and there's quite obvious things that you're seeing in that viewing, point them out to the landlord, because it is a good test. A reputable and responsible landlord, they'll act responsibly to these. And if you ask questions about why that table looks broken, will you be replacing the table? Or that cooker doesn't look like it's in good condition, or there's a hole in the window, a reputable landlord will deal with that, and they'll be realistic, and they'll give set, very clear guidance as to whether they intend to replace it, if it's planned before they move in, or if it will be planned after they move in. A more unscrupulous landlord is perhaps more inclined to not deal with those sort of questions direct, and perhaps try and rush into signing the lease, into handing over the money, and they might have a caveat in amongst that of false promises of, yeah, it's okay, you sign the lease and we'll fix the window or we'll fix the cooker. So perhaps just be aware of all those things. And as usual, get in touch with us. So if you've viewed a property, you see it, you're not sure, we're here to help and give you some advice and guidance. So please do that. And I think we'll hand back to Helen for tip 6.
Okay, tip 6 is time to sign. So you found a flat you really like and you want to take it. What's the process? If you have found your property via letting agent, they will more than likely walk you through the process correctly. If you're dealing directly with a landlord, there's maybe a higher chance that things won't be quite as transparent, in which case, obviously, it's really important that you know your rights. So what should you be signing? We hear of many cases, unfortunately, where landlords have issued incorrect tenancy agreements that they have just mocked up, cobbled together from the internet, and added in all sorts of unfair terms and clauses. In Scotland, there's a standard document called the Private Residential Tenancy, which is the default tenancy for most privately rented properties. And I should note here, this doesn't apply to the big privately rented student halls, like companies like Unite and Fresh and all those big blocks. But if you're looking for something like a private flat in a tenement building, this would be the type of tenancy you would expect, a private residential tenancy. And these all generally look very similar. And we can provide a link so that you can see what one should look like. We would always advise you to make sure that you read over the details of any tenancy agreement and the inventory, as Graham mentioned, that you may be asked to sign. And if you would like, the Advice Centre can check over that tenancy agreement for you before you sign it. Just email it across to us and ask us to check it over, and we'll get back to you and flag up any areas that we spot that might be of concern. Second point is, what should you be paying? So at the outset of your tenancy, you should only be expected to pay rent plus a refundable deposit. You should not be asked to pay more than 6 months rent up front. And in most cases, it'll be much less than this, usually maybe about 1 month's rent in advance. Your deposit can't be more than the equivalent of 2 months' rent. And we would always suggest that if possible, you don't pay in cash. Try and pay through the bank so that you have got a paper trail, so that you can prove what you've paid later in case there's any disputes or queries. With regard to your deposit, you should be told by the landlord or the letting agent which of the 3 approved independent organisations will hold your deposit money. And again, we'll provide a link for more information on this. If you're being asked to provide a guarantor and are struggling to get one, the University Guarantor Scheme, which is run by the university's financial aid team, might be able to help you here. So do get in touch if you think that's something that they might be able to help you with. If you're being asked to pay any additional money, this could be for reference checks or something called a furniture fee or any of these kind of admin charges, or if you're at all unsure about the situation, please contact the SRC Advice Centre for advice before you hand over any money. The type of checks that might be done are, some agents might carry out things like credit checks or reference checks, and none of these should have any kind of fee attached. So again, you can get in touch if you're at all unsure about that. And lastly, back to Graham.
Thanks, Helen. So yeah, tip 7, And it's just really bringing together what we've said throughout all. It's really, so if in any doubt, get in touch with us. In the Advice Centre, there's 4 of us, and we've been dealing with hundreds and hundreds of housing queries for many years. So we're aware of pretty much all the pitfalls, warning signs, things that can go wrong, and what realistically can happen to correct things that have gone wrong. We've got a lot of knowledge of the area. We've got a lot of knowledge of Glasgow in general. We've got a lot of knowledge of the good, the bad landlords, problematic letting agents within Glasgow, and we've got very close ties with Glasgow City Council, who regulate all the landlords. So please do get in touch with us, because don't feel in any way that it's a problem to get in touch with us, or just get in touch with us if there's any doubts at all that you have during this whole finding a flat process. You can ask us any questions. You can send us over your tenancy agreement, as Helen said in the last slide. Ask us any questions at all. And some occasions, what we'll maybe do is we're quite happy to get in touch with a landlord for you, or get in touch with an agent for you. If there's any difficulty, or if there's any miscommunication, or you're not sure whether what the agent is saying is really correct in terms of the legality of it, or whether the landlord is asking you to do things that you shouldn't do. So all these questions are typical questions we'll answer, we're happy to answer. If you're already living in a property and things maybe aren't working out, so that could be even just with your flatmates, things just aren't working out, or financial problems, or the landlord perhaps accessing the property when they shouldn't access the property, or just anything at all. If you're already in the property, again, just get in touch with us. And sort of on a general level, we typically would make you aware of what options you might have. So no matter how difficult the situation or how bleak things look, there's usually always some way that we can navigate towards some form of solution. So get in touch with us, and any questions, we're more than happy to answer them. I think that's all the tips done. Back to maybe Ella.
That's great. Thank you so much, Helen and Graham, for taking your time to come and chat us through all those. That's really, really helpful. I know we'd mentioned that we were going to do a bit of a Q&A at the end, but I think most of the questions have actually been addressed in the different tips that you've covered there. I guess the only thing I would add to what you chatted through, Helen, about looking for flatmates, I know obviously that's been exacerbated this year and made more difficult, and maybe more people than ever will be nervous about looking for someone to move in with. The only thing I would add to what Helen said is that the SRC, we are currently looking into hosting a flatmate finding session. So I would say keep an eye on our events page and social media in the next few weeks to see if more information comes up about that. But that covers it. I think we only have one question left that came from the Q&A. So not to put you both on the spot, but if you have any advice on it, that would be great. Someone said, I've heard if I'm moving in with a few of my friends, we should be looking for a HMO property, but flats without can often be cheaper. Should we try and get away with looking for a property without a HMO, or are there any risks with this?
Okay. So the short answer is yes, there are risks with this. HMO, or House and Multiple Occupation licenses, were brought in a number of years ago following some really serious safety concerns in the private rented sector. And the reason for having them is to try and provide a basic level of safety in private rented accommodation. So to start with, if your landlord is knowingly letting out a property to 3 or more unrelated people without going through all the necessary licensing, then they could be putting your safety at risk. And you also, I think, have to ask yourself, if the landlord is willing to sidestep the law on this particular topic and not get an HMO license, what other areas might they be willing to sidestep the law on, and can we really trust them? Are they really a trustworthy and reliable landlord to have? So while I totally understand the lure of the cheaper property, I would say think very, very carefully about landlords who avoid HMO. We have also been asked in the past whether students themselves could get into trouble for living in an HMO property. I think it's unlikely, but it's not impossible. So that if you were to knowingly collude with the landlord to step round the law, to get out of the law, then it's possible that the city council could also take action against you, although I think that would be very rare, to be fair. I don't want to scare people unnecessarily, but I do think that on balance it is much better, and we would advise people to generally look for licensed properties and not unlicensed ones. Does that cover it, Graham? Have I missed anything?
I think that's very comprehensive, Helen. Yep.
That's great, thank you very much. That was all from the questions, but if anyone after watching this video thinks of any more questions that they'd like to ask the Advice Centre, as Helen and Graham have already said, don't hesitate to get in touch. The Advice Centre are a great team of professional and independent advice body, so they're always there to answer your questions and have been answering them for many, many years, so are definitely equipped to be doing so. So please get in touch. The email address and how to get in touch and other information is on our website, so go and have a look at that. And apart from that, I think that's us. So thanks again, Helen and Graham, for coming along and answering these questions. And yeah, get in touch if you've got anything else that you'd like to bring up.